South Africa's first choice for news. This is ENCA.
Live from Johannesburg, this is Tonight with Jane Dutton. South Africa's shrinking economy, how did we get it so wrong? And can China's $60 billion investment make a difference? And do we stay or do we leave? Justice Richard Goldstone talks us through the country's position on the International Criminal Court and what it means for our reputation abroad. Checkpoint follows up on a doctor who mistreated his patients and the Defence Force's reluctance to rehouse people evicted from Marievale military base. On Tonight with Jane Dutton. Tonight, South Africa is in recession. How many people could lose their jobs? And is South Africa's push to leave the ICC making the economy even worse? We talked to an economist and Justice Richard Goldstone. But first, the news with Shahan.
Thanks, Jane. Appreciate it. Of course, it is our top story. It's official. South Africa is in a technical recession. The economy shrunk for a second quarter in a row. Stats SA announced a 0.7% decline in growth. The largest negative contributors to growth in GDP were agriculture, transport and trade. Agricultural GDP was down 29.2%. Consumption by households decreased by 1.3%, but government says there's no need to be concerned.
I don't think people should panic. Of course, it's okay for people to be concerned, but which is a good sign that people are paying an interest in their country when this happens. And I think it's also going to call on all of us to work together to lift the country out of this.
The death toll at Denel's munitions factory remains unconfirmed. Officials say they suspect up to 10 of its workers were involved in the explosion last night. The building disintegrated in the blast. The company will work through the night to extract the bodies and try and get clarity on what caused the blast. Cape Town fire and rescue officials yesterday said 8 people had died.
Just want to repeat myself, it is not about the numbers. We do not know how many people in actual fact are in there, because if you talk about accounting, that means people which are missing from their families or whatever, but there's also people which are living on their own, and you can't say this with 100% assurance at this point in time. So I will not go into speculations.
The Transport Ministry wants to fast-track a probe into a Johannesburg train crash that left over 100 people injured. 2 passenger trains collided in Selby early this morning. There were no fatalities, but 7 people were seriously injured. Metro Rail says both trains were authorized to be on the same track. Eyewitnesses say one of the train drivers tried to reverse when he saw an oncoming train.
For now, the information that we have is that they were both authorized to be on the same track. We were using manual authorizing system because we are upgrading our signaling program in this particular corridor. So as part of the investigation, we are hoping to also zoom into a possibility of a human error.
Those are the headlines. It's back to Jane.
Thank you for that, Shahan. President Cyril Ramaphosa is working hard to sell South Africa to international investors, but while he's been promising good investment and clean governance at home, people appear to have lost confidence in the economy. Growth has contracted for a second quarter, and today we entered a technical recession. What will it take to fix the economy? How will Ramaphosa, famous for his negotiating skills, help get local spending back on track? My guest is Maudi Lentotswane. He's the founder and managing director of Humo Capital. Very good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start talking, just a reminder that if you want to call in and ask my guest any questions about the economy, please do. How did we get it so wrong? What happened?
Look, I think we didn't get it wrong, Jane. I mean, I think the people that were expecting miracles, because we've had the changes at a political level, miracles within 6 months, I think they were just, dreaming. The fact of the matter is we came in and the economy was under a lot of pressure. It was 9 years of a disaster. And just listening in some of the conversations and the witnesses that are currently giving testimony to the Commission of Inquiry into the state capture, I mean, it just sort of gives you an idea of how much of a crisis we were sitting in. So it was...
Is there, a positive signal coming from that? Does it show future potential investors that at least the government is trying to clean up its act? Therefore, that's a good signal to them?
Certainly. I think there is that effort, and it's a concerted effort across all the segments of the economy, whether it be the Treasury working together with all the other ministerial committees to make sure that we steer the economy in the right direction. There has been a lot of work. I mean, just the announcement that's coming through from China is that China is committing large sums of money. There has been a number of other commitments from the likes of Theresa May, who came through. So there is, I think, when you look at the prospects of the future and what's going to happen going forward, hope that we are going to see a turnaround. And I think we're talking about a history here, but I think the future does look much
there are many
better.
factors, aren't there? You talk about Theresa May and China. I mean, how genuine are these overtures, and how confident should they be, considering so much is still unknown here?
Yeah, look, granted, a lot is still unknown, and especially when you take it into the context of what's happening with the global trade. There's a lot of uncertainty still. But I think just the whole situation around the U.S. Almost being at loggerheads with everybody in the world, it does open up, Jane, it does open up some opportunities for the likes of the U.K., going through its own, divorce with the Eurozone, And of course, it does open up for them to look elsewhere, and Africa does present those sort of opportunities. But of course,
and do we approach these opportunities from a position of power, considering we are now in a technical recession? Does it remove some of our leverage?
I think it still does. When you look at the fact that we are in a technical recession, it doesn't really take away the fact that we still remain one of the continent that is rich, and it commands a rich commodities and mineral resources, which are still going to be required by the big economies such as China and the rest of the world. And I think we just need to go back and study how we've negotiated in the past couple of years and why it hasn't really benefited us, and begin to negotiate a little bit better.
And haven't the fundamentals remained stagnant? I mean, other than the history, the fundamentals, we've got problems there, haven't we, when it comes to mines?
No, certainly. I mean, this now says we are having conversations around the mining charter and also some other policies that we are engaging, we're currently debating, whether it be the land issue. We've got to make sure that this becomes the foundation at which we lay a positive outlook going forward, and make sure that we come up with these policies that are going to be more positive and more conducive for investments to come into this country.
And what do you think is the most detrimental? Is there one that is more detrimental? What is the one that is easiest to fix?
You mean in terms of the policies that we currently...
Yeah.
Or you mean in general?
And the fundamentals. I mean,
the fundamentals. Yeah. Look, we have in our power the policy framework. That's what is in our hands. To make sure that we craft it properly, we make sure that we define it and we communicate it very well, so that it doesn't leave investors wondering about what's really going down in our economy, and whether or not we are able to actually formalize these things. Investors want to make sure that there is, before they commit this long-term capital, there is an environment, a conducive environment for that capital to really come in. And that's what we've got to do. That's in our power.
Because it's not conducive at the moment. I mean,
at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, and you look at strikes. I mean, at the World Economic Forum, it was said that South Africa has the worst labor relations in the world.
Yeah, and those are the numbers that don't lie. These are the facts. And nobody wants to commit capital in an environment like that. And especially because, when you look at the emerging markets, generally, emerging markets involves risk. Now, when you've got the developed world doing so well, I mean, it's a no-brainer. An investor, why would I take that risk?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And why would they take the risk? I mean, let's deal with strikes.
Yes.
Should unions be dealing with this differently? Should they change the message to get a more positive outlook for the investor?
No, certainly. And I was following up the story around NUMSA that they're looking to list you know, their own company on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, I think for the first time they will begin to understand just how difficult it is, you know, to really participate in these sort of discussions where you've got to ensure that there is still protection and protection of that goose that lays the golden egg, which is the economy, which is that company that needs to be protected. You can't go all out and demand all sorts of things that are unreasonable. We're only killing the goose that lays the golden egg.
From the other side. Somebody else, or you know, another part that is between a rock and a hard place is the government, is Cyril Ramaphosa. I mean, how do you balance a strong economy, a message that there is a strong economy, and you deal with the electorate, considering we've got an election year coming up?
Yeah, no, it's a tough one. I mean, I think a very difficult one. He will get a full mandate, I'm sure, hopefully next year. And, you know, obviously he was dealing with so many things, you know, having to steer the economy, take over from somebody who's not completed his mandate, and correctly so, because it was just a mess. And having to now focus on the elections as well. So it's a very difficult task. But I think
we go back to that, sorry, because we've got somebody on the line from Cape Town. Helen, go ahead.
Hi. I just want to ask, Cyril Ramaphosa, very astute businessman, was the deputy president for the last 9 years, if I'm correct. Where was he when everything, all the corruption has happened? Where was he to not control and not to see that the corruption didn't go any further? Now he comes in and he's going to be the bright spark to try and sort out the mess. But surely he must have been complicit in the mess himself.
I think that thing, where was he, is obviously the million-dollar question.
That's a million-dollar question, and I mean, I think we can ask that question to a number of people. Where was Mnangagwa when all these things were happening? Look, I think it's more complex.
He has to restore faith. He has to. Yes,
absolutely.
To both the electorate and the investors, you know, often
certainly.
feel the same.
I think, granted, and I agree with some of the commentators who says, you know, the situation within the ANC, it's not one individual. The problem was far-rooted. And the commission of inquiry into the state capture, it tells you just how much it appears that almost many ministers were involved, whether it be Faith Mutambi and many others that have been mentioned here. So the corruption was far deeper than just one individual. And I'm sure it would have been very complex for one person to really try and resolve it. But given the opportunity and the mandate from the people, I think he's in charge and he can do that.
Okay, Warren from Constantia Cliff has called in. Go ahead, Warren.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I am concerned, or at least worried, about the fact that we're not dealing with the corruption in our country at the moment. We going and we're looking at external for investment, but internally in the country, I mean, look at our commissioner at the moment. He just spent, 10,000 police commissioner, spent over 10 million just upgrading his officers. That's disheartening to citizens of our country.
Thanks, Warren. That is the mixed message, isn't it? And
no, certainly.
Clean up that.
I think the cleanup of corruption is not going to be an overnight thing. Clearly, it was not the corruption that happened overnight. It's something that manifested itself over a number of years. And I think it's going to take a long period before it's rooted out. Odile Swane,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
South Africa has shown its intention to withdraw from the International Criminal Court, but how far is the bill that Justice Minister Michael Masutha introduced, and what will this really mean for the country? Up next, we speak to Justice Richard Goldston, who was at last week's International Justice Seminar.